Hi, I'm Paolo Debuque. I am the director of the chancel choir and the music coordinator here at Good Sam. My pronouns are he and him. I am very excited to kick off some of our AAPI commemorations this month with my good friend Suzanne Kozler, who is joining us all the way from Ann Arbor, Michigan, to share a little bit of her music as an Indian American and her experience as an Indian American. So, Susanna, welcome to Good Sam and Good Sam Online Worship. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. First of all, it's really wonderful to be here. I'm Suzanne Kozler, and my pronouns are she, her. And Paolo and I have known each other for 6 years. I did the math in my head while you weren't talking. Good. And Paolo's a really good friend of mine. I've learned a lot from him and working with him, so you guys are very privileged to have him, first of all.
That was not scripted.
No. I planned. Paolo told me to say that, so. No, I grew up born in New Jersey, so very East Coast. That means we're loud and brash and obnoxious. No, I'm sorry if you're from the East Coast. I embrace my East Coast heritage very enthusiastically. But my parents both came from India. My mom was actually born in Singapore, and so we grew up eating a lot of Asian food, which is, I don't know if that's normal for most Indian people, but here we are.
Normal.
What is normal? Yeah. I was homeschooled, which is kind of unusual. In fact, I don't know any Indians that homeschool. I know a couple of Asians that homeschool, Asian Americans, but not specifically South Asians. And my parents, while they spoke the Indian language, Malayalam at home, and we, ate Indian food, we occasionally went to the Indian church. We weren't super immersed in the culture where we all spoke the language, my two brothers and I, or we went to the Indian church religiously, or we were taught the language and cultural nuances of it. But I grew up, my grandparents lived with us in the home. We traveled to India every 2 years to see my family and relatives. And it was really interesting having this kind of merging of two very different mentalities, the Eastern mentality and the Western mentality. And so I've grown up being able, I think, to value both of those cultures and kind of to be exposed to different ways of thinking about things and almost choose okay, I actually prefer doing things this way. And that's been really meaningful to me. And there are parts of the culture Indian culture that I love to embrace, such as certain items of clothing or styles or the very communal, hospitable aspects. And other parts that I'm just not a fan of. And I think as I get older, having to evaluate, okay, I love this about the American culture, or I love this about the Indian culture, and finding kind of the harmony between those two things has been a really cool and special journey for me.
Cool.
Yeah.
So from New Jersey, from this Indian American double experience, you went off to Wheaton College.
Yes.
And then to the University of Michigan to study music. How has your Indian American background seeped into, affected, or maybe not affected that musical experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big question. So I think when I was an undergrad, I actually had these grand visions of learning Western classical style and then going to India and spending some time there and learning Eastern classical music and trying to find this combination of stuff. I don't really know why I wanted to do that. I think I, in general, am very interested in learning more about everything. And it wasn't necessarily I'm super attached to my roots. It was just oh, this is so cool, another musical language. I'd like to go explore that. But I, for the most part, really fell in love with Western classical music and its language, and I was seeped in it. And I'm one of those people, and I'm sure a lot of Asian Americans can relate, but when I went into a group of Indian people, I felt very white. I did not feel Indian. And then when I'd be talking sometimes in a group of non-Indian people, suddenly all of these like thoughts about my culture and Indian heritage would come up, and so it was strange because when I went through school, I actually did not think about Indian music at all. I loved Bach, I loved Debussy, I loved Fauré, and Indian classical music is just so different from all of that. The tonal language, the rhythmic language, it just completely, even the language itself, Malayalam, the similarities between that and a Germanic language like English are just so, they're so dissimilar. So I didn't actually engage a lot with Indian music in school.
I definitely resonate with that. And it's a reason, what you're talking about is a reason why I've been very careful, or I've been very, I've tried very earnestly to frame this entire process not as kind of, let's learn about what India is like from Suzanna, but more like you are Indian American, and what we're trying to do here is learn to give a platform for and learn from the experience of Asian Americans. And I definitely resonate with that kind of feeling one foot in each world.
Yeah.
Feeling like, a little whiter than Asian people that I would associate with, and a little bit more Asian than white people that I would associate with. And one thing that's been really cool for me, and I wonder if you felt any of this, is just by giving myself the platform to explore Filipino music, and just by almost forcing myself to, sign up for it and say, there is a time on the calendar where I'm going to have to know things and share things.
Yep.
It's really opened up. I mean, I've discovered a connection to my past, my musical past, that I wasn't even aware.
That's so
was there.
cool.
Do you feel that at all?
Yeah, completely. I've never been asked to do Indian music before specifically. I've been asked to do other things like wear Indian clothes or talk about Indian culture, which I might not be the best person to even do that, honestly. But working through this Malayalam piece, Devatanu Statram, that we'll be talking about, I realized, I do know how this is supposed to sound, which actually really shocked me. I was like, I know what this is supposed to sound like. I know how this is supposed to be pronounced. And it was also cool to call my mom and say, hey, will you pronounce this for me so I can make sure I'm doing it right? So again, I'm not necessarily this Indian expert on the culture, but I'm realizing I know more than I thought I did.
I'm getting chills because verbatim, exactly what you're saying. We were talking about how a friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, performed an arrangement of mine, a Filipino folk song that I had arranged for choir and piano. And so I went and worked with them a few times, and from my perspective, this arrangement is like stock. It's S-T-O-C-K. It's just, it reads off the page. It's so obvious how it should sound. Yeah. Because it's a Filipino folk song, and it just sounds this way. And to the point where I was worried leading up to working with this choir, will I even have anything to say? Yeah. It's all on the page. And then I get there, and this choir of wonderful, white people is singing it like a Lutheran Midwestern group, and there was so much that I realized that I knew without realizing that was a product of my identity. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like push comes to shove. I'm like, oh, I am Indian.
Right.
Oh, that's really cool. And I think, the perspective that I can bring. I mean, I think everyone has a perspective to share, regardless of your ethnicity, and at the same time, I do have something unique to offer, especially Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's not the most Indian area.
Yeah. And one thing that I'm so happy about from this process is, before this, I was quite nervous programming Filipino works to the point where,
Yeah.
I want to do it right, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And I doubted that I had the tools to do that. And so it's a scary endeavor.
Yeah.
And that means that I wouldn't do it as much.
Yeah. Yep.
And now just by having had this platform and thought through it a little bit, like it really feels like I have something to offer.
See, that's great.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That's why this has been a great process for me. Like, oh, okay, I remember now. It's like almost this memory, like, okay, I know who I am.
Because this kind of stuff was probably just like around you growing
up,
right?
Yes, exactly. And I've heard people say before, I was even talking to someone with a Swedish background 2 days ago, and she was saying, like, she didn't know what she was doing. She was just doing it. Like, they were just making the baked goods, and she had no idea how culturally important it is. Or when they sat down for tea, and like, it was a cultural thing, and she had no idea. She had no name for it until recently. And so I think it's very similar.
Yeah. That's awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about the pieces that we're going to be hearing?
Yeah, so the first piece that the choir will be doing is called Devatanu Statram, and I have the translation here because I do not know Malayalam, but the text means glory be to God, so Devatanu Statram, and we'll be singing in Malayalam, and that is one of quite a number of languages in India. So when we think about India, we think about Hindi predominantly, and Hindi is like the predominant Indian language, I believe. English is actually widely spoken in India as well. But Malayalam is a language, I believe, and I could be wrong about this, but it is primarily spoken in South India. And that's where my parents are from. So my mom is from Kerala, and my dad also is from that Kerala area, which is South India. But Malayalam is a really, I don't even know how to say it. Like, your tongue does really odd things in your mouth when you're saying it. So when some of the D's, there are different ways to put your tongue in your mouth. So you can say duh or duh or duh, and your tongue goes like back and forth. It's fascinating.
Do it again.
My mom's probably gonna laugh at me hearing this. So there's duh, and then duh, duh, and then like just different ways of pronouncing consonants. But the piece itself, it's fully in Malayalam, and it's really reflective of a lot of the characteristics of Indian music. So Indian music as a whole, both in the classical genre and otherwise, is extremely melodic. So there's not often harmony elements. And so usually you hear a piece done in unison. In the Indian churches in the States that I went to, they would sing in parts sometimes, but it was more often with the English pieces. So Indian music will be very melodic. Sometimes it's modal, like church modes. If you know what that means, it doesn't always start, in a C major scale. It might start on D and go up that way. And people are very comfortable singing in modes. Sometimes a meter isn't, what we're used to, 4/4, 2/4, 3/4. It's sometimes in 5/8, and again, people just grow up singing this way and they're used to it, and so it's not strange to them.
And correct me if I'm wrong, like an Indian classical musician might not even think in terms of a meter, in terms of like a 3/4 or like a...
Yeah, that's a good question. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but Indian music is super rhythmic, and it's possible that they are thinking metrically, but the meters are not clear cut, like always the same. Sometimes you get something nuts, like 15 something. Right. It's just long bars. And other times in the classical genre specifically, you might have like a raga, which is just like a delicate unfolding of a scale, and it sounds very improvised, very unmetered. But in the Indian church, everything feels extremely metered, very unison. Primarily driven by a keyboard or an organ, and then there might be additional instruments, and they're often those instruments, and I find this fascinating, is they allow for microtones and slides. So they're usually violins, strings, flutes, And, if you think about a sitar, which they wouldn't use in the Indian church, but, you can bend the strings. And we'll be doing that with our vocal lines. So some of the vocal lines will have a little slur, and instead of singing, you sing, and then the whole Indian vocal world is very much bright. I wouldn't say, like, it's super nasal, but definitely more nasalic. I feel like whenever I say nasal, it's easy to think of like this caricatured, like, yeah, and it's not ugly, it's just different.
Yeah.
But instead of, what you were saying, like living in the vowels of the Midwest, like, it's all about the consonant.
Cool.
And you always go to those like M's and N's and L's. So it's very repetitive. There's a refrain, and the men and women will trade off lines, and then we'll all sing together. And that's kind of a summary of the piece.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And how about... tell us a bit about our other piece.
Yes, As the Deer. So the pieces I'll be doing this Sunday are very reflective, actually, of who I am as an Indian American. So in the Indian church, we would sing those Malayalam hymns, but also occasionally there'd be an English service, and they would sing a piece like As the Deer, which is a 1980s piece that, if any of these names sound familiar, Keith Green, Rich Mullins, it came out of that evangelical, like, Protestant revivalist movement. So it's very old. And I remember even as a kid, like, why are we singing this? It's so old. But that's what they wanted to sing. And it's a very personal, reflective song. And again, oftentimes in unison, but sometimes they would have a choir with simple parts and, 4 parts, 3 parts, and maybe a guitar, maybe a keyboard, maybe drums. So much more like a Western style. But what I did, so the text is based on Psalm 42, as the deer pants for the water, so my soul longs for you. And I absolutely love that text, but in this setting, all I can think of is like, oh, my childhood. It's not super personal to me. I don't even reflect on the words because all I think is like culture. Like, I don't have this intimate experience with the Lord. And so what I did was I actually arranged it in a style that I'm more comfortable with, which is Western classical choral music. I am by no means a qualified composer, but as a person that's a church musician, you often end up arranging music whether you like it or not. And so when I arranged it this way, it made it so much more personal for me. I actually was able to like reflect on the text more and think about, yes, like I long after the Lord, and the imagery of a deer, like a thirsty deer. Like I really struggled when I was working with this text. I kept thinking about a deer putting on pants, like as a deer panteth, and I was like, this is not what this means. But yes, in more ways than one, it made it very personal.
Yeah, every morning I pant, and then I shirt.
Yes, yeah,
and then
exactly.
sometimes I jacket.
Occasionally sock in the fall.
I usually, yeah, if
Socketh.
I have to, I sock it. I really like the music that you've brought because to me, and correct me if I'm putting 2 and 2 together and getting 5, but it's such a clear picture, I feel, of the, or such a authentic response to the question that I posed to you and that I've been posing and encouraging our congregation to pose throughout this month of what has being AAPI meant to you. And we have this hymn that's in your parents' tongue.
Yep.
And then we have this song that we're going to first do in the way you grew up hearing it in the Indian church, and now the way that you would do it today. And I just think that's so special.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up with that. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope that you enjoy the music.
Yes, thank you.
Deva innu stotram, Deva innu stotram, Deva innu stotram, innum ennecum, Deva innu stotram, innum ennecum. Papa baratir nin denne rakshicho. Excellent. Papa baratir nin denne rakshicho.
Good.
Devat innu stotram innum entecium.
Devat innu stotram, devat innu stotram, devat innu stotram, innum entecium. Ente devat innu stotram, innum entecium.
Devat innu stotram innum entecium.
Devat innu stotram, devat innu stotram, devat innu stotram, innum entecium. Ente devat innu stotram, innum entecium.
Desire, and I long